Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Grand Canyon Star Party. I'm Ranger Raider Lane, the National Park Service coordinator for the event. And for 31 years running, Grand Canyon has been celebrating our pristine night skies through the annual Grand Canyon Star Party. Now, ordinarily, we have hundreds of astronomers and thousands upon thousands of visitors to come to the park to enjoy 8 nights of some of the darkest night skies in the United States. Now, each evening is kicked off with a special guest speaker in our theater, followed by telescope viewing, constellation tours, night sky photography workshops, and much, much more. Next year's Grand Canyon Star Party is June 18th through the 25th, 2022. So mark your calendars and cross your fingers that we'll be able to celebrate on site next year. This year, we are bringing Star Party yet again to the virtual realm. And we're really excited. We have a whole host of incredible speakers who have been willing to participate. And before we introduce our special guest speaker this evening, I have a few entities that I would like to thank from the National Park Service for their help in supporting this event. First, I'd like to thank the Grand Canyon Conservancy. Now, they're the park's official nonprofit partner and have done incredible work promoting dark skies in Grand Canyon and beyond. The International Dark Sky Association, they're the entity that certified Grand Canyon National Park as an international dark sky park back in June of 2019. And we are very grateful for that and for all the work they do. I'd like to thank the Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association. They are the group that has been coming up for decades to the Grand Canyon Star Party to volunteer their time and share the wonders of the universe through their telescopes and equipment. And so we just really cannot do this without the TAAA. So thank you to them. And then finally, we'd like to thank the Society for Cultural Astronomy of the American Southwest. They are an entity that has helped us coordinate many of the speakers this year. So we thank them for their help. And with that, I would like to introduce tonight's special guest speaker. Tonight, we are honored and excited to have with us David Kerner. David he got his PhD in planetary science at Caltech. He worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on the formation of solar systems. His emphasis is in observational astronomy, having worked with telescopes such as the Hubble Space Telescope, the Very Large Array, the Keck Telescope in Hawaii, and many others. He focuses on disks around newborn stars from which planets are formed, and just does all sorts of incredible stuff in the field of astronomy. He was a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania before coming to Northern Arizona University. His teaching focus has been in astrobiology, but he was instrumental in adapting an Intro to Indigenous Astronomy course to the Northern Arizona University campus, which became wildly successful and was based off of a course created by Nancy Maryboy and David Begay, two speakers we hope to have later on this week. And they created an online form of that program years prior. Now retired, David is a resident of Northern Arizona and enjoys studying the various cultural astronomical sites of the greater Grand Canyon region. So David, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so excited and thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Raider. Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about some of the wonderful sites in the Grand Canyon region that you could visit when you come to the Grand Canyon. I know many of you come to this area attracted to its dark skies, and many of these places have dark sky official status. And whether they do or not, the skies are dark and beautiful. But they also have many traditions of cultural awareness of the sky from ancient people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about places you can go nearby where studies have been done and we have recognized interactions with the night sky from ancient astronomers. And hopefully this can add benefit to your trips to the region. Now, I'm going to discuss sites that have been acknowledged and discovered through a field called archaeoastronomy. that name sounds kind of like it's two components coming from archaeology and astronomy. And archaeoastronomy is the study of these archaeological sites and artifacts and ruins to try to determine the astronomical practices, lore, mythologies, and religions, and the worldviews of ancient cultures. So, in this talk series, you've heard from present day native speakers about current astronomy in tribal lore, and that falls under a field called ethnoastronomy, and it's very complementary. We can sometimes use that information to interpret prehistoric artifacts and their relevance to astronomy. But in my talk, I'm going to talk about a study of some of these sites. Now, an awful lot of the archaeoastronomy that's done in sites concerns the alignments of ruins with celestial positions. And so here's an example from Chaco of Pueblo Bonito. And the earliest version was facing slightly east of due south, but when added onto, it had just a straight east-west line at the bottom to it. And of course, this is an alignment with the cardinal directions, but they in turn are very reflective of the sun angle. And so you would get the most sun by facing due south over the course of a whole day. And we see many alignments. And this is one of the simplest alignments you can have. But there are other celestial body positions that may align with ancient sites. Now, we have to stop here for a moment just to help ourselves understand alignments with a little primer in a coordinate system called the horizontal coordinate system. And it's basically how you can point to things in the sky from your point of view, just maybe standing in the open parking lot of the visitor center at a typical Star Party event. And there are two coordinates I want you to understand. One is how high something is above the horizon, and that would be a coordinate sometimes referred to as altitude, and it's given in an angle where 90 degrees would be directly overhead and 0 degrees would be on the horizon. And then the other one is a little more tricky. It's which direction you're looking, and we use a coordinate called azimuth. And azimuth is sometimes referred to as degrees east of north. If you face due north, you're at 0 degrees azimuth. As you start to rotate looking toward the east, you increase your angle. If you went a full revolution around and came back to north, you would have gone 360 degrees. Here's a little up close. The altitude or elevation is measured from the horizon. Those are two words we use for the same coordinate, altitude or elevation. By the way, the zenith angle is the complementary angle measured from directly overhead. And then here's the chart I want you to see because we'll use it for understanding alignments. As you can see, 0 to 360 degrees is full circle. If you look north is 0, due east 90 degrees, due south 180 degrees, due west 270 degrees, and that's azimuth. And it's a useful thing to understand the alignments of buildings with the celestial events. Now, what's an example of a celestial event? Maybe the most common one is the day. Sometimes we call it the diurnal cycle, where the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. However, as you'll notice, it doesn't always rise due east. It sometimes rises a little north of east, sometimes a little south of east, and that changes with the seasons, which brings us to another cycle, the annual cycle, which is very important to native peoples and to ancient astronomers. And here you can see the sun's path. You can notice, as you probably already know, that in the summer, the sun gets to its highest point, and we get a lot more sunlight. And in the winter, it doesn't rise quite so high. But the other thing you should notice is where the sun starts out and where it ends on the horizon. If you look at, say, the midsummer solar path there, you can see that it rises not directly in the east, but north of the east, and also sets north of east. Whereas in the midwinter, winter solstice to be more precise, the sun is rising somewhat south of east and setting due south of east. This position on the horizon where the sun comes up and sets is a very useful way of knowing the time of year. Now, you and I are going, why don't you just look at the calendar? Because we have our Western calendar and we have dates and we just pin everything on them. Well, our Western calendar is not all that. I mean, if you have you ever noticed that the dates of summer solstice and winter solstice are not the same from year to year? Why is that? Because the number of times the Earth revolves on its axis is not necessarily coupled to the time it takes to go around the sun once. And so to be really precise of where you are in the year, you want to just watch and see when the sun hits these positions, and that tells you when you've come full cycle. Now, here's other examples of cycles. A cycle is basically a periodic phenomenon, things that recur in a time period, excuse me. And ancient astronomy is often focused on these cycles. We've talked about two, the diurnal cycle and the solar year. Another set of important cycles are the lunar cycles, how long it takes the moon to go from one phase and back again to the same phase, and also planetary cycles, when you see planets like Venus return to the same place relative to the sun in the sky. And ancient astronomers looked at all of these. My background here may look a little funny. This is a Mayan calendar, and Mayans were masters of measuring astronomical cycles and planetary cycles and lunar cycles. You can see here examples of cycles in ancient astronomies. The upper left is an example of using something called a gnomon, which is basically a kind of sundial. And then by looking at how the shadows move their orientation and lengthen and shorten during the day, you can tell time fundamentally. Other cycles on here, right in the middle, you see an astonishing thing, which is interpreted as a set of a full set of a lunar cycle from an Aurignacian period. This thing is dated to be 32,000 years old. So ancient astronomy is really ancient. If you look at the upper right, it looks like the ruin of observatory. I mean, I feel like I'm at Palomar when I look at this thing. This is a Mayan observatory without a telescope, but it is oriented and aligned so beautifully to see a number of things, including the cycles of Venus. If you look in the lower left, this is Mayan writing describing the cycles of Venus. And if you look in the lower right, and we'll come back to it, you can see basically a notched kind of ruler that measures where the sun horizon rise and set positions are and tells you to the month, basically, what time of the year it is. And we'll come back and talk about that. That's from Peru. Now, of course, when I used to teach Intro to Astronomy, we had an outer space view of all these cycles, which is not what you necessarily see from the ground. Notice how you're not on the Earth in any of these pictures, and they show you cycles of planets, the seasons, the solar day, and the lunar cycle. Yeah, there's a lot of detail here. Don't worry about it. My only point is that when we teach intro astronomy, we often teach an off-the-Earth perspective, whereas both in native astronomies and in sky watching and in ancient astronomies, you are looking at celestial objects from the Earth. And so you look at their cycles as they appear from Earth. So one of the things we used to teach is putting these two things together to understand the cycles both from the ancient astronomy perspective and from the intro astronomy perspective. All right, so let's start in with an easy kind of thing. Horizons, sunrise, and sunset watching. And this is still a modern practice, but was undoubtedly an ancient practice. What are we looking at here? Those of you who are local may recognize in the horizon that this is a horizon of the San Francisco peaks, and I live just to the north of those peaks. but it's as seen from the Hopi Reservation, in particular from the roof of a Bear Clan sun watcher's house. And a paper done by an archaeoastronomer registered where the sun sets as a function of day over these horizons. And this is how the Hopi sun watcher tells what time it is. And the farthest sun set, in this case, to the left, is at the time of winter solstice. And it is the sun watcher's job to pinpoint precisely when that happens and to do it a few days in advance. Now, why? Because when that happens, you've got to start some ceremonies. They see the sun as moving to this position, his winter house, basically. And he sits there and it's cold and it's going to keep being cold. And if you want to go into the planting season, you need him to turn around and come back. And make things warm again. And so a ceremony is a way of agreeing and placating the sun and saying, please come back so that we can plant beans. Because right now it's too cold. Don't stay there. And so the sun watcher has to pinpoint when that's going to happen. He has to say in a few days in advance so people can get ready. And so he has to know very precisely from a particular position where the sunset and sunrise positions are on the horizon, and that's how he tells. Now, this is just a natural alignment, but of course it depends on where you are looking from, right? If he went to, 10 miles south, it would not appear the same place on the horizon. So there is an alignment, but it's the alignment of the position of viewing. I can't help it. This always reminds me of Ansel Adams' photography remark where he says, the key to great art photography is knowing where to stand. And of course, he was basically just saying, framing the picture is a big part of it. But the same is true for Pueblo and sun watchers. They have to know where to stand if they're going to use horizon markers. All right. Well, you can add, this was Chanquillo in Peru, you can add some building elements. What you see here is this thing is 2,300 years old. This is, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I misremembered that, but it's very old. And you see the sun, and at different times of the year, it will fall in those notches, but only as seen from a particular position. And on the right, you see the observatory building that locates where you are to look from. So it's an example of an archaeoastronomical alignment on solar horizon positions. Now let's talk a little bit about northern Arizona. If you look on the right, you see basically an azimuth diagram, and you can see marks that show you where the sun comes up and where the sun sets at summer solstice, and where it does that at winter solstice. And of course, at equinox, it comes up due east and due west. Now, this particular diagram is for a latitude a little bit north of us, but I think this is a fun thing to know. I've lived in a meadow surrounded by cinder cones for almost 20 years, and I'm off the grid, so natural light is very apparent. And I can tell you a little notch in the trees exactly where the sun will come up in winter solstice, because I've just watched it year after year, and it's just a thing that you notice. And I think that's what ancient astronomers did as well. And so if you're in northern Arizona, you can do this too. You can do this actually anywhere in northern latitudes. It's just your angles will be slightly different. Just for the record, I think this is really easy to remember, that around at the latitude that we are here near Grand Canyon, the sunrise on summer solstice is about 60 degrees east of north, and sunset is 60 degrees west of north. And so you can actually go, I love knowing this because I like to know where the sun's going to come up or set at Grand Canyon. And so I take a map of Grand Canyon and I can draw a line with these angles between any 2 points, a point on the rim where I I want to do my watching from, maybe Shoshone Point, and then I can tell by drawing that line exactly where the sun is going to come up or set on a particular rim of the canyon. So it's a fun thing, and it's related to these archaeoastronomy building alignments. Now I'm going to start with a site that's a little bit out of our local region, just because it's such a beautiful it's such a beautiful comparison to what we were just talking about. And this is in Wyoming, so it's a little farther out, but it's a great example of what are called medicine wheels. And medicine wheels, there are quite a lot of them, especially going up into Canada, and they are from the Plains Indians. If you ever want to go visit Bighorn Medicine Wheel, it's a good stop on your way to Yellowstone. And it's up in the Bighorn Mountains. It's pretty high elevation, so it's not a good winter visit where it will be covered with snow. And you can see it looks almost like our azimuth diagram, doesn't it? And there's a lot of spokes. So what were they looking at? Well, there are also these cairns on the outside, and if you connect two of the cairns, you often get a very interesting direction. So here's this. If you connect this cairn with the central one, whoops, sorry about that. If you connect this cairn with the central one, you'll get a line pointing to summer solstice sunrise. Similarly, if you connect this one, you get summer solstice sunset. So there are alignments here, and Native Americans could go and determine the time of year. Now you may say, why is there not a winter solstice? And the answer is quite simple. This is a high site covered with many feet of snow in the winter, so it wouldn't be of very much use. Now, what about some of these other lines that are indicated here? And you'll see, if you know their names, you'll recognize the names of stars between several of the cairn intersections. And that's probably right, because these are among the brightest stars in the sky. And when those stars first are seen to rise out of the glare of the pre-dawn is determined by also a time of year. So they can be seasonal markings. However, if you're going to look every morning before dawn to see when you can finally see some star in the glare of the sun, those of you who've maybe tried at a star party to be the first to see, say, Jupiter as the night gets dark, you know that it's very helpful to know exactly where to look. If you're trying to look for Jupiter and everyone goes, oh, I see it, and you're like, where? I don't see it, and you have a hard time seeing it. So it's a great advantage to have a marker here to say, look, this star is going to rise right at this position on the horizon if you look from this cairn to this other one. These are so-called heliacal risings. Of course, the stars always rise at that position, unlike the sun, at least within your lifetime and as far as the accuracy with which you can see. So you can always look in that direction. And I love, I confess, I love the heliacal rising of Sirius, known as the dog star, for which the dog days of summer are named, primarily probably because the heliacal rising of Sirius happens in the second half of summer. That's when you can first start seeing it. And it's a wonderful season event. My bathroom window looks right out on the horizon, and I know the notch in the trees where Sirius will come up. And I start looking for it in early August. I'm like, nope, can't see it. And then finally, there it is. I'm like, wow, new season is upon us. So it's a great thing. All right. Now, these alignments have an interesting aspect to them. You might ask, well, how do you know that was a real alignment intended? And the answer is sometimes we don't. And I think nothing could illustrate this more than this funny event that happens, which has been called Manhattanhenge. The streets in Manhattan are aligned along the long axis of the island. But that so happens to be 90 degrees off from the solstice rise and set points. So the narrow streets aligned with these buildings have a funny phenomenon where they're just a little bit off. So it's a few days before and after a solstice, the sun will rise and shine at its rising point directly down the street. And this is a solstice kind of rising, and a lot of people now get together and celebrate it. But the streets were not laid out for that reason. I just want to point that out. And so, if you're a little skeptical sometimes, that's not a bad attitude to have. And archaeoastronomers have to always contend with some uncertainty. All right, let's start our tour. So, I thought I would start with this amazing place, and I understand my colleague Brian Bates has talked about this a little bit in his talk as well. Chaco Culture National Historic Park, again, a tremendously dark site in the northwest corner of New Mexico, shown here in the map. The yellow lines there are ancient roads, which were laid out fairly precisely for those times. And Chaco was an amazing metropolitan center. You can see on the right the remains of one of the ruins there. I think that's Pueblo Bonito. It's kind of the MGM Grand of the ancient Four Corners world, a giant, many room hotel, if you will, and people came from all around for ceremonies, etc. And both building alignments and rock art have been found that show the importance of sky phenomena to those people. Here's one of them. You're looking from the sort of inside of the largest known kiva, Casa Rinconada at Chaco Park. This is a fun thing to go see. It is aligned very precisely with the cardinal directions. As you can see, you're looking to this T door opening, and it's directly below the North Star, and you can tell that by the star tracks, right? So it's aligned very well. But some of the windows are also possibly aligned. And if you look at the little inset that I put there, that's a picture I took when I went there at summer solstice a few years ago. And you see that little inset there is illuminated, and it's illuminated by the rising sun coming through another window, kind of on the opposite wall. And so you can go to Chaco at solstice, and there's quite a celebration there. Be forewarned, they limit the number of cars that they allow to go in. They close the gate, and people line up while it's still well dark. And the first 100 cars get to go in, and you can go, and then we all stand around the wall and watch the sunrise, and it shines through this window and illuminates this other inset. And possibly these other insets have other alignments that have not yet been identified. But this is an example of what would have been a ceremonial kiva, and it would have had a roof on it. So think how exciting that would have been to have this shaft of light come in, and you can tell the time of year by where it is illuminating the opposite wall. Now, that's a principle that is easy to see in many buildings. Even the modern native Navajo hogan is always built facing due east. And so how the sun comes in that door during the year and projects against the opposite wall is basically a calendar, and they can use it that way. And I noticed that in my own house, how the rising sun comes through the windows and what part of the wall it goes on is determined by the season. So there's a building alignment at Chaco. Perhaps more famous is a rock art alignment that was studied by Anna Sophir years ago. I believe that Brian Bates talked about this as well, so I won't talk too much about it. But it is a thing that we see in other areas across the Southwest, so it's very useful to understand. In the upper right, I have a picture of Fajada Butte, where this was discovered, and Anna Sophir was looking at rock art on the outside of Fajada Butte around the time of solstice, and she happened to then see in an inner recess this spiral, and the sun during the day came through cracks in these rocks, and at solstice period put a dagger of light right through the center of the spiral. well, was that a coincidence? Uh, did they put the rocks there, or did they see the shaft of light and then draw the spiral? Lots of questions, of course. Moreover, at the winter solstice, two daggers appear on either side of the spiral. So if you see in the main picture I have there, that's the winter solstice. And on the right, you see the sun dagger right through the center in summer solstice. Well, coincidence or not, it got people studying and looking for more examples of rock art alignments. And we'll come back to that in some other sites. But before we leave Chaco, you have to take a look at this wonderful set of pictographs. You can see how astronomical they are. There's a phase of a moon, there's something that looks like a star. We have a hand, and below there, kind of faintly, and in the inset, I've given a figure drawing of it so that you can see it more plainly. There's this bizarre flaming target thing, which looks a bit like a comet. So people have speculated that it is a comet. Moreover, that it could have been an appearance of Comet Halley, because Comet Halley appeared near in time to a known supernova. And so maybe these two things illustrate the occurrence of a supernova about 1,000 years ago, at a time when Comet Halley did a flyby. We can't know for certain, but that's the case of many things in archaeology. What we can know for certain is that this set of pictographs shows that the importance of celestial phenomena to these ancient people. They took the time to paint this on the wall, so they were noticing these things, and they probably had an important role in their beliefs and thought patterns about the world. All right, so now we're going to move to a little bit of a complicated site. If you go north from Chaco, you can see where Chaco is there in New Mexico, just across the border into Colorado, there is Chimney Rock National Monument, which is the northernmost Chacoan site with a Chacoan-style building. But it records an interesting lunar cycle event. And so bear with me here, complicated diagram of a lunar standstill. Now the moon also changes its azimuth rising site, but it goes through what would have been a whole annual cycle for the sun in the space of a lunar orbit, which from phase to phase, as seen from Earth, is about 29 and a half days. So if you watch the moon rise on consecutive nights, you'll see it changing its azimuth rise position. And it does what the sun does. It goes from an extreme point to the north of east when it's rising, and then back to an extreme point to the south of east. And these points are called the standstill. And you can imagine why. The sun is moving from night to night, but then it comes to a point and it basically stops and then turns around and goes back. So that's a standstill. But the thing about the moon's orbit is very near to the orbit of the Earth. So these standstill positions are kind of close to the solar solstice positions, but it's not exact. The lunar orbit is 5 degrees off. And so sometimes the moon goes farther north than the sun. Sometimes it doesn't get as far north as the sun. And so these standstills are divided into major and minor standstills. And the moon reaches its farthest range, its major standstills, once in the full moon, once in an 18-year cycle. So that's an interesting and quite a subtle thing. You'd have to watch moon risings and settings for many years to notice where that alignment position is. Would you do that if you were an ancient astronomer? Well, if you were the watcher, I mean, it's your job to watch everything come and go and rise, and so you'd be doing that all the time. And eventually, you might notice this. Well, do we see any evidence of that in a site? And here's this astonishing site at Chimney Rock. If you look in the lower right inset, you see a kiva, a Chacoan building site, and it is positioned so that if you look between those two spires, the moon will rise between those spires when it reaches its major lunar standstill. So that's kind of exciting, and lots of study has been done, and I think it's probably worth a visit on your tour to go look at it. Of course, you have to wait once every 18 years to actually see the event as it was intended, but still a beautiful Chacoan site. Now, not too far from there, if you go a little west, you'll come to Mesa Verde, which of course is famous as a national dark sky park that has amazing cliff ruins, but it also has some archaeoastronomy to it, and so I thought I would mention it. You might want uh, to stop there, and you can see there it is on the map. And I'll simply mention that the alignments that have been studied are alignments in Cliff Palace and Sun Temple. Now remember, since we talked about the sun coming through the east-facing door of the Hogan or through your window, and then a shaft of light landing somewhere else, some of the windows in these towers and alignments between towers show the same alignment. Is it intended, or is it Manhattan Henge? Not sure. But again, who can pass up a trip to Mesa Verde? Whoa. All right, if you go a little further across the border, right on the border of Colorado and Utah, you come to Hovenweep National Monument in our tour, and there are some alignments that have been studied there among the towers. Now, I love the towers of Hovenweep. They're very like the kinds of towers that modeled the Desert View Tower in Grand Canyon. And of course, that you got to go there and see all the astronomy murals painted there by Fred Caboti from years ago. There's constellations and meteors illustrating a lot of Hopi astronomy. But here, studies have been done on window alignments by Ray Williamson you can read about them in his book Living the Sky, I think, which is usually appears in many bookstores in national parks. So take a look for it, and give yourself a chance to stop there and take a look at these towers. All right, circling back down into Arizona, here's kind of my local area, and just above this map is where Grand Canyon is. If you come down 89 on the right, you'll come to Wapatki National Monument, and it's one of the nearest sites to Grand Canyon. I believe Brian Bates did talk about this particular site at Wapatki, and called Kraken Rock. And I'll show you an example here again of a site. Here are a bunch of big dots, and it just so happens that protrusions in the rock make a shadow, sometimes called a shadow dagger, and that dagger lines up against the dots, as you can see in the inset, at equinox. Now, there's a lot of other things here, and this is a very recently studied site by David Purcell with Museum of Northern Arizona. And if you want to go see it, it will require a little bit more work. You can't just drive up to it. It's a bit of a backpack, and you have to go with a guided ranger hike. So you can register for it at Wapatki, and then they will guide you out to the site. And there's many other amazing pictographs, and it is still in the process of being studied for its archaeoastronomical significance. So an interesting site that should be on your lookout. And the last one I'm going to talk about is south of Sedona. So now we've been coming south from Hovenweep, we're going down to a fun area you can drive to, the V-Bar-V Heritage Site. V-Bar-V was a ranch that owned the land, but there's this amazing set of pictographs that was recently very well studied. And what you'll see here, let's see, I don't know if you see my cursor, but if you do, the rocks here have been placed. So they are not just naturally sitting there, and that's been established through study, and they're here as well. And so they cast shadows in a very particular direction at a near noontime solstice illumination. And those shadows, based on time of year, will hit certain pictographs. Here's a little spiral. I don't know if you can see it, but the shadows will hit that at winter solstice. There are other symbols along here, and this thing is just chock full of many different kinds of pictographs. But if you go to VBARV Heritage, they'll give you information on the study of them and their significance. Here's a little map. You come down I-17, 179, right there. I'm sure you can look it up. All right, well, that's just a sampling of what I'm calling the Four Corners Ancient Astronomy Tour. If you start at Chaco here, you can go up to Chimney Rock, Mesa Verde, Hovin Weep, Wapatki, and come back down to VBARV. And of course, you're going to stop at Grand Canyon. You may even be doing this near in time to Grand Canyon Star Party, and take a look at these different astronomy sites. So just a suggestion, whether you go to any one of them or all of them, I hope you enjoy seeing the sky as the ancient people of this region would have seen it. Last but not least, I want to give a shout out to the Society for Cultural Astronomy in the American Southwest, and they are also a wonderful source for additional information on archaeoastronomy of the region. And you can become a member or get as involved as you like. And so I've put their website up there in big font. And I hope you have a great enjoyment of both the night sky and the cultures of the people who used to live here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. That was a fascinating talk, really well-rounded, and just very much appreciate that greater region tour and the way that you formatted that talk for folks who might be visiting Grand Canyon and might want to do that larger regional tour. I have so many questions, but just to keep it somewhat brief, if you don't mind. My first question would be, so you've indicated like a few sites here and given some examples, but how can you paint a picture of how prevalent these sites are around the Southwest in general? I mean, have you just talked about 80% of them, or are we talking about thousands? What's your perspective on that?
I'll have to plead the fifth, because I think the first thing that comes to my mind is how little study has been done compared to the number of ancient sites that exist. And if I can put them in two categories: rock art sites and versus ancient ruin sites and buildings. From Grand Canyon archaeology that there are thousands of ruins, and there are equally large numbers of rock art sites. Now, I know that members of the Society for Cultural Astronomy in the American Southwest are busy, for example, doing a survey of rock art sites and their alignments. And they're just in the beginning of collecting hundreds and hundreds of surveyed pictures of the rock art sites. There are spirals everywhere. Now let's sit back a minute with the spiral. There are other spirals that have sun daggers, and so it makes archaeoastronomers think, "Oh, wow, this is kind of a universal solstice sign," right? Modern tribes say no. They say the spiral is our symbol for migration, or at least some tribes do. There might be others that have different interpretations. So we have to be careful here. But again, the game is to try to find these sites and then compare them with astronomical alignments. And I think we're just beginning to exploit the full capacity. There's just a beautiful new set of tools being constructed at ASU for computer simulations of sites. As you can see, if we know the azimuth of the solar sunrise at solstice, we don't have to sit around and wait for solstice to see where it's going to come from, right? We can model it in a computer. And so the new software that they're working with will also take photographs of a site and make a 3D representation of all the elements in the site, and then can project to tell you how different celestial bodies will impact it. But this is just in the just in the beginning of operation, and of course there's more sites that are unexcavated than excavated, for one thing.
Hmm.
Um, and then, of course, there's also a lot of practices in ancient astronomy that wouldn't have left a relic or a mark. Like our Hopi sun watcher, he knows where his roof is, but 100 years later, you're not going to go, "Oh, wow, this roof is aligned." So you won't know that.
Mm.
So my feeling is that we only see the tip of an iceberg, but we may not see the whole iceberg.
I guess I guess that's it for me. I mean, the one tough question I have, which might not be tough, might be easily answered for you, is how would the I can understand how the summer solstice and the winter solstice would have been observationally marked. How might they have determined the equinox observationally for some of these sites?
Um, yeah, I've always thought about that too, because like I said, I know where the solstice positions are on my own horizon. There's kind of a large hill in the due east from where I look, and so I know when equinox is because I'm an astronomer. But I'm always like, well, where exactly is it rising? And how would ancient people have known the equinox position? For one thing, unlike the standstills, at equinox, the rise position is not standing still. It's changing more rapidly than at any other time of year. I mean, it's moving from day to day. So if you were trying to pick out, well, what could you do? I mean, if we just speculate, we certainly could go halfway between the two solstice positions, which of course would have been for solstice rise, for equinox rise, would have been due east. And one thing Native Americans are often very good at is cardinal directions.
Mm.
They know, they have a great sense of literature and thought about the meaning of cardinal directions, um, where things come up, where things set. And so if you look at even symbols, say from Hopi symbols, you'll see a cardinal direction sign with quadrants that have different associated colors that are very specific. So I would say part of the answer has to be their astuteness about cardinal directions. They
Yeah.
know, and those can come from many other ways. I mean, we know there's the North Star that gives us the north, but the sun during the day, the simple gnomon, when the shadow of the sun is at its very shortest, it is due south. So if you have due south and due north, and you can go 90 degrees from either direction, and when you construct a hogan, you do exactly that. You
Hmm.
construct it according to. I heard a wonderful talk about the mathematics of constructing a hogan, and it was basically some basic geometry of how you position all the pillars for the hogan, etc. They know cardinal directions, and I think that has to be how they determine equinox. It's
Yeah.
and what would be its significance? Not sure. I think many Native American tribes don't call the seasons in terms of four, and I think they're right. They have two seasons, and what we call these, spring and fall, these equinoctial seasons are really transitions.
Hmm.
Things are changing really fast, and so they
Yeah.
have, it's more logical to a sky watcher and to a native person to say, look, you've got winter and you've got summer, and
Yeah.
then when you're in between, you're in between. You're changing, and you're changing
Yeah.
fast. That's really not the thing. And those of us who live in northern Arizona in April know that this is not a well-defined season.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well,
snowing. It's
it's
70 degrees. Make up
yeah.
your mind. You know.
Well, it's just like you say. I mean, what you explain there, it's a testament to almost our questioning this type of determination of equinox is a testament to, you know, what we've lost as a society in terms of actually being observational sky watchers. You know, we're kind of atrophied. We rely so much on arithmetic and geometry and calculation instead of going out and actually intimately watching the azimuth and the change along the horizon line. So that's something that is definitely worth preserving, and just a wonderful thing to do, as you do at your own house. Just knowing the little notches of where the sun rises in different places in different seasons is just a great thing that I encourage everybody to do. So with that, thanks so much, David. We really appreciate you. And for those watching, please tune into the virtual telescope viewing session premiering right after this talk. And again, Star Party 2022 is June 18th through the 25th. And hopefully it'll be celebrated on site in the future. You all can come and meet David and talk about some of the wonders of cultural astronomy with him in person on site at a future Star Party. So with that, David, thank you so much. And we hope to see you soon up here at the Canyon.
Sure enough. Thank you for having me.